Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Thomas, and this channel is dedicated to educational matters. Today is video number 171 on the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory was derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He put out many books and articles to propound his system of theory. It's a theory of everything. If you understand how the theory works, you can plug it into any subject. It enables you to independence yourself from the scientific establishment. You're able to figure out these things for yourself with some common sense, some deduction, and some guidance from Mr. Larson on his principles. And it's not easy, but nothing of any value really is easy. So the main reason why it isn't easy, though, is because you have to unlearn stuff that you learned in your high school physics class or your high school chemistry class, or if you took those courses in college, or God forbid you actually studied that stuff on a higher level. You got your head filled up with a bunch of nonsense. And, it's, it all pretty much makes sense. And actually, it usually comes out mathematically. But as Larson says, conceptually, most of the stuff that's taught is unscientific. Again, the math works, and you can get results. You can even make devices and machines and so on. But the concepts aren't there. And so there's no kind of holistic connection between all of the different disciplines. They're all on their own little island. Okay, now the basic idea with Larson's system is that we don't live in a universe of matter, and we don't live in a universe of energy, but we live in a universe of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are thereby reciprocals of each other. They are the two numbers in a fraction. Motion is the fraction, and time and space is the numerator. Time or space is the numerator, and space or time is the denominator. And they're reciprocals in that way, just as 2/3 and 3/2 are reciprocals of each other. And they both, therefore, have the same qualities. They both are coordinate, meaning they have 3 or more dimensions. Time and space have 3 or more dimensions. And they both have their clock aspects, meaning that they both progress, getting later. Time is always getting later and later and later. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. And they both come in only discrete units. There is no maximum, there is no minimum. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. And below that, they don't exist. So 1 unit of space is on the order of 4.56 times 10 to the minus 8 meters. And 1 unit of time is on the order of 1.52 times 10 to the minus 16 seconds. So every second that goes by is 6.576 quadrillion units of time. So that's quite small. But nonetheless, it is a minimum. So there's nothing less than that. Okay, now, um, how that manifests is that 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. So if you take that 4.56 number and divide it by that 1.52 number, you get 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. And that's the speed of light. So the speed of light is really the midpoint or the background or the origin of the universe. Half the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. This Larson calls the cosmic sector, and this is the half that Einstein didn't know anything about, where when Einstein said that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. Actually, in the cosmic sector, the speed of light is the minimum speed of the universe. In the material sector, the sector we're more familiar with, Einstein is correct. The speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. It's the low speed half of the universe. Now, these two different universes interpenetrate, and they both are accessible, but we don't see one of them. One of them is basically invisible. We only see it as its inverse aspect. So, as one of Larson's followers, Dr. Bruce Perret, who's also recently deceased, has said, we don't see time. We don't see time. We only see space. And so we see the space half of the universe. We see the half that's moving slower than the speed of light. That's motion in space. Motion in time is on the other side, and we don't see that, but we see its reciprocal. So we see motion in time as an inverse motion in space. And then again, you can use a white dwarf star as an example. A white dwarf star is a star that is exploding in, in time. And so it appears as if it is imploding in space. And thereby you get a very small and super dense star. Okay, now we are looking at his 1979 book called Nothing But Motion. And this is one of the first of a 3-volume set called The Structure of the Physical Universe, which also includes volume. This volume here is mostly on physics and some organic chemistry. Then his second volume is called Basic Properties of Matter. That is on chemistry, and the third volume is called Universe of Motion, and that is on astronomy. These are 3 of, I would say, Larson's major works, the other being Beyond Space and Time, which we've gone over. I already put down probably almost 100 videos on that. And that is on metaphysics, on philosophy, religion, and psychology, and some other esoteric stuff. But here we are looking at chapter 9 in Nothing But Motion, and this is on, the chapter is called Rotational Combinations. He's basically explaining the mechanism of atoms and also subatoms. And just to keep in mind, we've got really 4 different kinds of motion. We have a translational motion, we have a vibrational motion, we have a rotational motion, and we have a rotational vibration. So they all kind of have their different functions. The translational motion is really like the progression, scalar motion moving outward. If you got a vibrational motion, you basically have a situation where that allows to create a photon. A photon is a simple harmonic motion. That's according to Larson. Some of Larson's followers, after he died, or even while he was alive, disagreed with that and posited that the photon, the simple harmonic motion, instead came out of what there was called a birotation. Two counter-rotating fields would, when you use Euler's epsilon function, I believe it is, that creates also a simple harmonic motion. So there is a dispute there. But matter is generally created using rotational motions. And again, these different kinds of motion can come in 1, 2, or 3 dimensions. So, it can get kind of complicated. As Larson said, the universe is basically composed of very simple elements, but once they're combined together, it can get complicated real fast. Okay, we're going to start. Read this first paragraph here and then move on where he's kind of comparing radiation and atoms. In the case of radiation, there is no inherent upper limit to the speed displacement, conventionally measured as frequency, but in actual practice, a limit is imposed by the capabilities of the processes that produce the radiation, examination of which will be deferred until after further groundwork has been laid. The range of radiation frequencies is so wide that, except near 1/1, where the steps from n to n plus 1 are relatively large, the frequency spectrum is practically continuous. The rotational situation is very different. In contrast to the almost unlimited number of possible vibrational frequencies, the maximum number of units of rotational displacement that can participate in any one combination of rotations is relatively small, for reasons which will appear in the course of the discussion. Furthermore, probability considerations dictate the distribution of the total number of rotational displacement units among the different rotations in each individual case, so that in general there is only one stable combination among the various mathematically possible ways of distributing a given total rotational displacement. This limits the possible rotational combinations that we identify as material atoms and particles to a relatively small series, the successive members of which differ initially by 1 displacement unit, and at a later stage by 2 of the single displacement units. With this understanding of the fundamentals, let us now proceed to an examination of the general characteristics of the combinations of rotational motions. The existence of different rotational patterns is clear from the start, as the rotation can not only take place at different speeds, displacements, but in a three-dimensional universe can also take place independently of in the different dimensions. As we will see in our investigation, however, some restrictions are imposed by geometry. The photon cannot rotate around the line of vibration as an axis. Such a rotation would be indistinguishable from no rotation at all, but it can rotate around either or both of the two axes perpendicular to the line of vibration and to each other. Again, you've got x, y, z coordinates. The axis of vibration of one of the photon is one of the axes, but there are 2 other that are perpendicular to it. So if the x axis, if the vibration is the x axis, then the other 2 axes that it can rotate around, which would be the y and the z axes. One such rotation of the one-dimensional photon generates a 2-dimensional figure, a disk. Rotation of the disk around the second available axis then generates a 3-dimensional figure, a sphere. This exhausts the available dimensions, and no further rotation of the same nature can take place. The basic rotation of the atom or particle is therefore two-dimensional, and as brought out in chapter 5, it is in the inward scalar direction. But after the two-dimensional rotation is in existence, it is possible to give the entire combination of vibrational and rotational motions a rotation around the third axis, which is also inward from the scalar standpoint, but is opposed to the two-dimensional rotation vectorially. Okay, again, you got to remember the distinction between scalar and vectorial motion. A scalar motion is a motion that has no magnitude. It has a magnitude but has no direction. And a vectorial motion has a direction. And so there's a different, you envision a scalar motion by using a balloon, putting dots on the balloon, blowing up the balloon. All the dots are moving away from each other. That's a scalar motion. They're moving away from each other, but in no particular magnitude. Again, that is what Larson calls clock time or clock space. And you suck in the balloon, then you have an inward scalar motion. All the dots are moving toward each other. That is what he's talking about here. It's an inward scalar motion. But then, in addition to that inward scalar motion, you have a two-dimensional, you have a one-dimensional motion that can go in the also inward in a scalar from a scalar standpoint, but it is opposed to the two-dimensional rotation from a vectorial standpoint. This reverse rotation is optional, as the basic rotation is distributed over all three dimensions, and nothing further is required for stability. So it's this reverse rotation is not necessary. So what that would bring to mind is, the noble gases. If you look at the periodic table, the family of the noble gases are the ones that have the two-dimensional rotation, but no one-dimensional reverse rotation, whereas all of the other elements have all three. A rotating system, therefore, consists of a photon a rotating system, therefore, consists of a photon rotating two-dimensionally with or without a reverse rotation in the third dimension. Although the two dimensions of the basic rotation have been treated separately for descriptive purposes, first generating a disk by one rotation and then a sphere by the second, it should be understood that there are not two one-dimensional rotations, there is one two-dimensional rotation. This distinction has a significant bearing on the properties of the rotational combinations. The combined magnitude of the two one-dimensional rotations of n displacement units each is 2n. The magnitude of a two-dimensional rotation in which the displacement is n in each dimension is n to the second power. It is not essential that all of the rotations be effective in the physical sense. Unless there is effective rotation in at least one dimension, it is meaningless to speak of rotation, as such motion cannot be distinguished from translation. But if there is effective rotation, that is, rotation with a speed differing from unity in at least one dimension, there can be rotation at unit speed, zero displacement, in the other dimension or dimensions. This is the kind of stuff that you have to kind of read over and over and over again, or listen to my voice, going over this over and over and over again. Go slow. He means what he says and he says what he means, but he doesn't always have the perfect language to express it because he's trying to invent it here on the fly. These are concepts that haven't been delved into by anybody ever in the past. And so, you know, you have to kind of cut him a little bit of slack and, hear him out. You can't just dismiss it because it is confusing at first blush, because again, you got to give him a little bit of a slack because he's trying to come up with a new language and new terminology to express very kind of abstract concepts. And, that creates difficulty. So cut him some slack and kind of just assume that he knows what he's talking about until you actually figure out what he is talking about, and then you can assess. Okay, the vibrational speed displacement of the basic photon may be either negative, greater than unity, or positive, less than unity. Let us consider the case of a photon with a negative displacement, to which we propose to add a unit of rotational displacement, rotating the photon. Inasmuch as the individual units of vibrational displacement are discrete, that is, they are not tied together in any way, the one applied unit of rotational motion results in rotation of only one of the vibrational units. Because of the lack of any connection between the vibrational units, there is no force resisting separation. When the one unit starts moving inward by reason of the rotation, it therefore moves away from the remainder of the photon, which continues to be carried outward by the progression of the natural reference system. Irrespective of the number of vibrational units in the photon to which the rotational displacement was added, the compound motion produced by this addition thus contains only the vibrational units that are being rotated. The remaining vibrational units of the original photon continue as a photon of lower displacement. Okay, once again, just go slow and try to let it sink in, and we will stop it right here, and we will resume with this chapter tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.